Can you hear me well? Testing, testing, testing. Can you hear me? You should be able to hear me.
Hi, everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes. So I was going to tell everyone to sit down, but everybody is already. Except Annie. Sorry, keep talking. We have a missing phone. If anyone can see a phone lying by itself somewhere, please throw up a hand. All right, thanks so much for coming, everybody. If it is your first time here, big welcome to Trajectory Labs. If you need to use the washrooms right outside the glass doors, you can get in by using the pin, which is on a sticky note on the keypad to the right of the door. Yeah, very excited to have with us today Jason Young, who's going to be talking to us about the concept of political space and AI safety. Jason has said that this is going to be a very discussion-oriented talk, but I'll let him elaborate further on that. But for now, let's give Jason a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
One more thing. If you are going to be saying something to Jason, please throw up your hand, and Georgia will run up and give you a mic. This is so that our online viewers can hear the discussion. That's all.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, you guys improve the setup every time I do this. It's amazing. So hello, my name is Jason Young. I am a geopolitical analyst who focuses on frontier AI. And the topic of today's talk is the concept of political space and as it applies to AI safety. Now, this talk is really for my fellow members here at Trajectory Labs. The entire time I've been here, I've been repeatedly asking people to think more politically without really defining what that means. And I realize that is a little annoying. So this talk is an attempt to kind of rectify that, what I mean by thinking politically. You know, because for me as like a lifelong political analyst, geopolitical analyst, thinking politically comes pretty naturally. It's kind of like being an old fisherman and being able to read the currents of the sea. So I'm going to attempt to lay down some core foundational concepts on political space, what it is, and how thinking about it will benefit those of you who are working on AI safety, especially on the policy side. So just in case you want my LinkedIn, this is a way to stay in touch. I'm not going to linger on this because it'll be on the feed. So I'm not a communist, but I like this quote a lot. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. This is a quote attributed to Lenin. I like it because you often hear about the ebb and flow of politics, but the ebb and flow gives some kind of sense of consistency. Whereas in politics, both nationally and globally, as well as society, There are some changes that are so slow that they are imperceivable, and then there are some times when like the entire world changes overnight. Also, like this quote, greater than the tread of mighty armies is an idea whose time has come, written by Victor Hugo, the 18th century French novelist. For me, I like the quote because it gives you a sense of how currents move through society. And it's like ideas are almost like bubbles on top of water. And like political movements are like understanding which bubbles will end up where based on like where the currents are going. So today I'm going to introduce like two separate but related concepts. The first is a concept of political space. Think of it like a burst of energy in society that's set off by some kind of crisis. And second is the concept of the policy window. And that's kind of what you do with the energy created by the crisis in the political space. So political space encompasses like all of society, from the average citizen to the elite decision maker. However, fundamentally in a democracy, it's grounded in the mass of the population, how they feel, and how their feelings impact decision makers, whether this is like the elected officials or whether it is like top business leaders, for citizens as consumers. And the policy window is more centered around government, elected officials, and bureaucrats. And it's about how the official agenda is set and under what conditions certain progress can be made on certain issues. So let's explore more in detail. So what is political space? We're talking about the space inside people's minds. We're talking about the space created by perceptions of costs and rewards, perceptions of what is possible and not possible, perception of what is a problem and what's not a problem, and what can be done and what can't be done. These are all, we're talking about perceptions here. For political analysts, political space is kind of like the sea on which everything floats. It's ever changing. It tells you when to sail, when not to sail, and how to sail. Political space is, a more, concrete definition is political space is a range of ideas and actions that are legitimate, discussable, and actionable in a given political context. It expands and contracts as events, narratives, and incentives change. It's not about what's true, per se. It's about what's possible to do and say without paying a political price. And, what are some other characteristics of it? It can open and close. When one space opens, another closes. They can kind of, multiple spaces can exist alongside each other, and they can kind of crowd each other out. It changes in response to internal or external events. It allows for certain conversations to take place, certain actions to happen. It makes possible realities that were not thought possible before. Fundamentally, it's what makes things politically possible. Sorry, I think I've repeated myself a lot on this. So all political space is fundamentally crisis-driven, or at least there must be some kind of perceived crisis in the minds of like the people who open the space, or some kind of prevailing state of affairs that needs to be addressed or changed. And to what extent this political space opens depends on three main factors: intensity, proximity, and materiality of this crisis. I'm going to discuss each of these in turn. Intensity of a crisis is how it feels and how far this crisis like changes the situation from what was the status quo. It's a magnitude of the disruption to the existing order. What is being lost, the scale of harm being perceived, the degree of emotional impact. And a high intensity crisis would be a complete departure from normal politics or a complete break from the prevailing system, like the whole world has changed, something like that. A low intensity event would be like a disruption, but you can handle it within the bounds of normal politics. The second is proximity. How close is this crisis to us? Is it far away over there, or is it here now? Is it going to happen someday in the distant future, or are we seeing it happen right in front of our eyes? It is the perceptual distance between the crisis and a person's lived experience. It can be, the closeness can be both physical or temporal, like in time. So a high proximity crisis is something happening right here, right now, kind of like COVID happened. And low proximity would be something over there that happens maybe someday. And third, we have materiality. What is the character of the evidence of this crisis? Am I mostly seeing this on the internet, or is like literally a flood coming down the street and like wiping out our house? The extent to which a crisis can be grounded in concrete, observable, and empirically verifiable phenomena versus abstract, symbolic, and hypothetical ones. High materiality would be physical destruction, visible casualties, damage, firsthand experience. Low materiality is like discursive or predictive evidence existing only through models or like forecasts. But you know, it helps a lot if we ground all this theory in concept. So let's go through some examples, just so you understand what I'm talking about. So the first one I would go through is the Trump's 51st state threats. How would we analyze this? You know, so, this changed our entire country. You can track this when he first started making those threats towards the end of last year. Everyone thought it was a bad joke, but then he kept saying it, and then we started taking it seriously. And it was felt by most Canadians as a fundamental betrayal. Before, I think we were okay with our role nationally, kind of in being like a good little brother to the U.S. But after the 51st states threat, like it felt like that world that we were in before, overnight, we could not go back to. So the world had changed overnight. So for this reason, I would argue that the intensity of the crisis was very high. As for proximity, we were not seeing any signs the U.S. would actually like invade us. We did see them use their tariffs against us, but then they started using the tariffs against the world, so it wasn't just us. So I would say the proximity was low to medium. You know, Trump mentioned the 51st state periodically, but arguably it was more of like to get an effect than actual signal intent. You know, he didn't make it a priority to annex us, you know. As for materiality, I would say this is low. You know, other than video clips of Trump we watched on YouTube, we didn't see much evidence of this threat in our day-to-day life, other than like, American liquor being pulled off the shelves, but that's more a reaction. So in terms of like how we evaluate this event in terms of opening the political space, it was not the most dramatic opening possible. Yet, despite its kind of moderate opening the political space, look how this changed our political system. Like overnight, well, not overnight, but like over a couple of months, you saw the greatest comeback of the Liberal Party that will be studied by political science classes for like, generations. Such is the power of opening of a political space. Now, the next example is a little more extreme. Let's look at 9/11. This one is pretty straightforward. High intensity. An iconic symbol was attacked and destroyed at one of the most iconic cities in the U.S., New York City. And it happened seemingly out of the blue. For those of us who lived through this era, you could see how the world changed overnight. And for almost 2 decades after 9/11, they talked about a post 9/11 world. And they don't use that term anymore, but, for like almost 20 years, they use that term. And this was an event that kind of ended an era and began another. This is the power of a high-intensity event. I would also argue that this was a high-proximity event. I remember I was actually at U of T when 9/11 happened, and they closed the school. They closed the CN Tower. They thought someone was going to, fly into the CN Tower. So all over North America, whether you're a little town in Ohio or like a large city, everyone was scared, and the perception of the danger was that it is here and it is now. In terms of materiality, I would rank this medium simply because most people watch the 9/11 attacks through videos and read about them in the newspaper. Most of the people, they did not, normal people, regular people did not witness a terrorist attack in their daily life generally. Not like, if you lived in like Afghanistan and Iraq and you actually, more people witnessed those terrorist attacks. So this was a dramatic opening of the political space. And things that were impossible, like domestic surveillance of the U.S. population, invading countries, installing governments, like things that the U.S. had not done for like a generation, became possible with this. Okay, so let's do one together, just so we can ground this concept. Climate change. What does anyone have any thoughts about the intensity. Remember, we're talking about intensity, proximity, materiality. What does anyone think about any takers for intensity of climate change? What do you think? Anyone?
Yeah, of course. Um, I was actually thinking about the three of them. So I feel like materiality, if you don't mind me beginning with that. I feel like it seems to be like increasing. I feel like there's more and more signs, and people are like taking in a bit more that, oh, this might be like a serious issue. Just the fact that it's this warm in October kind of like makes people a little bit more conscious of it. Intensity, like, could you clarify this? Is like intensity we have right now or that we project in the future? Because if we're talking about projecting to the future, I would say the intensity is pretty high.
Intensity is your feeling to it. It's like how much of a shock it is. It's more of like a visceral feeling.
Okay. Well, in that regards, I feel like it does vary between individuals. I feel like there's definitely people out there who perceive it as an existential threat, and there's other people who seem not to mind it too much. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yep.
Like moderate intensity, I would say.
Why? Why do you think?
Because it's not something that that for the average person has changed anything in their life or become a crisis. But I think it's something that it's on people's registers, maybe daily or weekly, depending on who you are.
No, I think that's very reasonable. You know, my personal rating, I would rate intensity as medium. I would say it's higher in the mid like 2010s, like when I forgot when Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth documentary came out. Back then, there was a lot more like headlines and like international conferences, and I remember the IPCC reports, and back then there was much more of an urgency of like, we need to fix this in like 5 years, otherwise we will all die kind of element to this. But that time came and went, and I would say the intensity has died down a little. So I would overall agree with your assessments. Sorry, you have a...
Would this be an example of like other political issues crowding out this political matter out of the political space?
You're saying what are other example of other issues crowding out the space?
I'm asking if the matter of climate change is an example of a political issue being crowded out of the political space because other stuff has become more relevant.
I would say that that's always an issue. Like political spaces are always crowding each other out in terms of what's most loud and what's it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. But in terms of climate change, I would say that both the intensity, proximity, and materiality would depend on your what you believe. Like if you're an anti-climate person, you would just filter all these natural phenomena through, oh, this is the Earth's natural cycle, or climate change is a hoax. And then for you, these ratings are different than someone who takes the IPCC reports very seriously, So, anyways, that's enough time on that. But, sorry, you want to say?
Yeah, you just started talking about what I was going to talk about, which is there's a polarization, and that both sides can't really do a knockout because one can say it's not really departed from historical norms enough to say it's real. But like when I think they'll change is if one side can more definitively show they're right, but that remains to be seen. I don't know if that's going to be seen or not. But
Well, I mean, I think that's a good point. It's like one population can produce multiple political spaces from different segments of that population. I think this next example is kind of an oddball one. We got the QAnons people. That's probably the most extreme example of fragmented political spaces, So for this one, I would say if you're a QAnon, the intensity and proximity are extremely high, and the materiality is still lower medium, because I don't think most QAnon people have witnessed like this satanic pedophile ring with their own eyes. But the evidence is there on Twitter, on 4chan or wherever they go. But if you're not, none of this stuff exists at all. So political spaces exist alongside each other, and it's definitely affected by media, information, messages. So factors that act upon these intensity, proximity, materiality, repetition of messaging, echo chambers, who you consider experts, their opinions. But one thing I'd like to say though is that intensity does rise and fall over time in terms of its emotional impact, simply because you get used to things. Like the shock of the initial events, after you get used to it, then it kind of resets. So the space kind of closes just due to that by its very nature. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's pivot over to the discussion of the concept of the policy window. So the political scientist John Kingdon introduced in his book Agendas, Alternatives, and Public Policies, he had a multiple streams framework. And he argued that policy change in complex governments, especially democracies, rarely come through linear planning. Instead, issues rise to the top of the agenda when three relatively independent streams align. And this opens a policy window. These streams are 1, problem identification. This stream is about perception. A condition only becomes a problem when it's recognized as something the government can or should address. Second is policy solutions. The problem identification is not enough. Policymakers act when credible, technically and politically viable solutions already exist. These are ideas that sometimes are come up on the spot, or more often than not, these ideas are pulled from like think tanks, academia, and bureaucracies, and these are ideas that may have been existing for a while, but kind of just have risen to the surface. So in terms of AI safety, this is kind of where all those AI safety reports and documents that have been produced, this is kind of where they add value, because they kind of sketch out the solution space to a set of different problems. And the third stream is the politics streams. This reflects the broader political context, national mood, character of national leadership, in what interest groups are there. Like if you look at the this determines what policy solutions are politically feasible and not feasible at the time, based on the inclinations and like the ideas of the governing administration. Like what the Trump administration is willing to do is far different from what the Biden administration was able to do, simply based on the character of the regime. So according to Kingdon, all three streams must align for a policy window to open. But when a policy window opens, these policies can actually move at significant speed. So how does political space interact with the policy window? Intensity, proximity, and materiality of political space affect each element of this window. They affect the collective recognition of the problem. They affect what alternatives are feasible and not. Imagine how feasible it would have been to tell Canadians they're not allowed to buy Kentucky bourbon before the 51st state threats, And they also affect what's feasible politically. So with this in mind, let's apply this analytical lens to look at what we're all here for today, the political space for international action on AI safety. And let's begin with a review of events here. So ChatGPT, as you know, was launched November 2022. Now it is known as the ChatGPT moment. I would argue for the general public, how good it performed was so shocking that it created a high intensity political space because no one had seen this before. Like literally the world had changed the moment you started interacting with it. Of course, 100 million users by January, fastest growing app in history. By March 2023, you had an open letter by AI researchers calling for a moratorium on training new AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. So you have existential risk narratives already being raised into the psyche, combined with the dual, like, wow, there's so much opportunity in this, and wow, this is very scary. Where are we all going with this? This dual kind of space that's been opened. That was followed up in May in 2023 by Sam Altman's testimony in front of Congress, where he pretty much begged for government regulation to prevent societal harms from AI systems. A lot of the headlines were like, this is the first time we've seen industry ever beg us to regulate anything. So it was like just the oddness of that it plays upon the public psyche as well. In July 2023, the Biden White House came up with a number of AI-related executive orders, including this voluntary commitment to manage AI risks. This is not an executive order, but there was a lot of attention paid by the Biden White House to this. This all culminated in November 2023 when the UK held the first AI Safety Summit with key national leaders of countries around the world in attendance. I want to emphasize how fast this happened. Like, for a conference like this to be organized within a year of ChatGPT's release, and for national leaders across the globe to attend it, it shows how fast AI rose on top of the political agenda of the UK government, the US governments, and also many governments around the world. So I'd argue that in terms of alignment of the political space and policy window, this was probably the most aligned time we've seen in terms of AI safety. AI in terms of AI safety for sure. Moving on, February of 2024, you started to have like little scandals like this one with Gemini producing quote unquote woke images, This and other malfunctions of AI in the public eye help illustrate that AI, despite being extremely powerful, could go wrong. Now, in April 2024, you had reports of U.S. frontier AI companies refusing to comply with evaluation agreements that were made during the UK Safety Summit from the UK AC, which casted kind of doubts on whether the goals of the summit could be achieved. In May last year, the second AI summit was held in Seoul, one-day summit, and it progressed some of the commitments made, such as establishing the network of AI safety institutes around the world. However, not much other tangible progress was made. I mean, that I know of. If you think differently, let me know. But I actually represented a shift in tone of the UK government, which had previously been focused on tackling the most serious frontier AI risks. So you see the shift in tone in the UK government. Of course, November of last year, Trump was elected. With that, his vision of the US and its role in the world, which differs sharply from the Biden administration, changed the US approach to AI safety and pretty much everything else in their relationship with the world. And of course, with Trump's election, you had the realignment of tech CEOs, including frontier AI companies, behind Trump. And you start to see more national security talk from frontier AI CEOs. Of course, it did not begin with Trump. Like national security and AI was kind of a theme. The race against China was a theme leading all the way back to Biden and before that. But when Trump was elected, you saw the rhetoric drift more into this territory than not. And of course, in January, you also saw the release of DeepSeek R3 and its impact on the US tech market, which lost $1 trillion in valuation in a single day. This shifted thinking on competition with China and caused panic in Washington and Silicon Valley. February of this year, at the Paris AI Action Summit, Vice President Vance gave a speech. He said, "I'm not here to talk about AI regulation. I'm here to talk about AI opportunity." And making it clear that the U.S. does not consider AI risk, existential risk especially, front and center, but they're more concerned with achieving AI dominance across the world. And this stance was actually echoed by the organization of the summit itself by France, which focused a lot less on existential risks and more on AI and economic opportunity, its impact on the labor market. The International Report on AI Safety, which was supposed to be the centerpiece of these AI safety summits, as envisioned by the UK, was sidelined. And as a result, the joint statement of the Paris summit was not signed by the US or the UK, fragmenting like international consensus. The Paris summit was roundly criticized as, for the one hand, on sidelining AI risk, and on the other, for not producing much deliverables from the economic or labor angle. And just a couple of months ago, in July, the US AI Action Plan comes out, which is completely focused on winning the race with China and achieving U.S. global AI dominance. That said, the report does mention safety in a surprising way. So after all this evidence, and I'm sure I left a lot out. There's also, this is what I can find open source, but like there must be a lot of conversations behind the scenes. Like the more information, the better. But that's just a brief survey of evidence. But with this evidence, my question is, based on the framework we have about the political space policy window, what explains the loss of momentum of international action on AI safety from November 2023 to September 2025? Yes, sir. This guy in the front right here.
I think lowering intensity in the public perception. At the start, ChatGPT was this crazy thing, and now everyone calls it chat and sort of accepts it as normal.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I think we saw a loss of momentum in every field that implicates international action, not just like AI, even like climate change or anything. So I think there's just like a more global framework change of more individualism from the country rather than collaboration. So I think that also played.
Very nice. Yeah, those are good points. Anyone else, sir?
In almost every instance, like nuclear power, nuclear weapons, climate, the ecology, major activist movements rise up, and they often coordinate to pressure governments and things like that. Why has nothing like this appeared for AI? I don't really have an answer for that, but I'm surprised that this hasn't happened. And that would be also a reason for fragmentation too, because they haven't coordinated or coalesced around a single cause. It seems like it's like almost non-existent compared to these massive demonstrations that have occurred on other issues.
Yeah, very
No less important.
very good point. Very good point. Wim?
I can imagine it also has something to do with the nature of AI progress. You've seen on the one hand, I think progress becoming much less legible to the average person, where a lot of the progress that's happening now is a big deal if you work in math, but most people don't. And then also it's generally more useful. So I think the opportunities for maybe places like France, who are in charge of setting up the summit, to advancing their national AI capabilities in industry are much more salient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Anyone else? So yeah, I think those. I mean, actually, my analysis contains elements of literally all those answers. I would argue if we look at all these factors, I would argue that in terms of the political space element, in terms of so just to recap, the political space element is like the crisis. The policy window is like the action. So in terms of the crisis, like the political space, I would argue that it has not changed very much, but it has receded a little bit. Factors behind its slight closure is that, as mentioned, the intensity is lower because ChatGPT is not new anymore. Our baseline has moved up. We have not had any further ChatGPT moments, and I would argue that despite the intensity contracting a little bit, I would argue that the forces that are expanding the political space are all these news reports about AI-related layoffs and how hard it is for Gen Z grads to find jobs, which I think increases the proximity and materiality of the crisis, but perhaps not in an existential risks kind of way. But I would say the major factor behind international progress being stalled is the policy window. Use my laser here. From the UK to the Paris summits, I think many governments have redefined the problem from how do we prevent AI existential risks and other harms to how do we harness AI to improve the economy. And this is an interesting point because I have it on good authority that the only reason the UK summit was the success it was the success that it was that the UK and US administrations literally dragged the rest of the world there to do it. And I don't think many other countries had a baseline position concern about existential risk that the UK and the US actually had. So in a way, with the political change in the UK and the US, I think everything just went back to the baseline problem definition, which is like, what can we get out of this? How can we, kind of baseline electoral political pragmatism? How's this going to benefit our economy? Second, I would argue that the inconclusive outcomes of the Seoul and Paris conference kind of muddled the field in terms of feasible solutions. I think the situation was more simple before we had any AI safety conference, and literally ChatGPT was out there. Something needs to be done about it. The most feasible solution at that time was to have a conference. But once the conference has been had, the difficult part is like what to do, how to get international cooperation. So in a way, the UK had the easiest job. Their job was just to convene people. And the tougher conferences are the ones that happen after, and you have to keep commitments and things like that. So in the context of the UK Sunak government, the policy window aligned for them to have this UK safety conference because, they were a relatively new government. They wanted a high prestige, low cost event. The UK has existing expertise in AI, and a lot of the AI safety work has been located in like the London, Stanford kind of area. And unlike a climate conference where you actually have to put down money, the AI conference, you didn't actually have to do too much. And it's a lot of voluntary commitments, things like that. So it was a prestige event too. But I think everyone understood that implementing the goals would be difficult due to the vastly diverging political and business interests. So I would argue that now there is little consensus on feasible solutions, and there's little consensus on the problem definition, So yeah, third on political feasibility, as touched on by audience members, the rhetoric from 2023 till now, everything's shifted a little more to like sovereign AI. Every country's looking over their own interests. Trump's election obviously made this official that the U.S. is no longer the leader of the international system, and everyone's got to look out for themselves. This creates conditions which is kind of very difficult to have the type of cooperation that would have formerly taken place under Biden. So with all that, there is some good news. The good news on AI safety, and for those of you focusing on existential risks, is that if you believe these systems will lead to harms without any internationally agreed safeguards, given that no internationally agreed safeguards exist, then events in the future will lead to the reopening of the political space. Crisis, not a good news thing, but it's like crisis will happen, and there will be opportunities for the political space to open and for the policy windows to align again. And this is kind of the time when ideas in AI safety literature can be dusted off and they can take on new life. So the stuff that you're working on right now, you never know. It might have relevance somewhere down the line, So the name of the game right now is to watch, prepare, and wait for the moment, because the moment will come again, because those of us working on AI safety we do believe that these harms, unless they're mitigated, are going to occur, and nothing's being done to mitigate it right now. So what events can we watch for in terms of opening the political space? Unfortunately, these are all negative. I don't like to put them out there, but unfortunately, these are what we're going to have to watch for. I would say one stream to watch for is the deepening of the labor crisis. If enough people are unemployed by this wave of AI, or just the increasing inequality, like you already see a lot in like podcasts and like news reports about this. The next stage is to lead, as you said, sir, like mass protest, some kind of mass protest against this, and at a more extreme angle, political violence. Like Andrew Yang in his 2020 like Democratic run, he talked about how if robot trucks replace truckers, the truckers are going to start like barricading, highways and stuff, as an example of political violence. So these are kind of things that we can see coming. Another one I could see coming perhaps is like the introduction to humanoid robots, and like maybe it kills someone and like there's a discussion about it, But I think there's a lot of ideas. Those are what I can think of right now. But like I don't know if there's any ideas that you guys have about like events that are gonna open the political space. A little bit. Anyways, I'm gonna end my presentation on this, and pose the open question: like, what kind of events do you see opening the political space for AI safety in the future? Thank you. in front.
Maybe one big one would be a drop-in replacement for a remote worker. I think something like 40% of jobs in the US or some very high number like that are remote workers. And if we get competent computer use agents that can take instructions and then very reliably do the work, that could replace a lot of jobs and make a lot of people very angry.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you. The CEO of Anthropic talked about the coming white-collar bloodbath. And this is what makes it different from previous high unemployment situation, is when white-collar workers get into high unemployment, become dissatisfied. Studies have shown it leads to collapse of government, civil war, revolution, 3 out of 4 times. So that's going to happen. In this case, the jobs are gone permanently. You're going to have persistent mass unemployment that will involve all swaths of society. And this is going to happen, they're talking about 2 to 3 to 5 years. Not a massive political space. I don't see the government, they're pretty quiet about this. Maybe an ostrich comes to mind, but I don't know what they're, like, is the universal basic income, are they going to put anything in place to stave this off? Because this is going to happen very quickly. Moore's law is not applying to AI. They're coming up with something like 4 to 5 times faster. This is very, very fast. Like, if we thought something comes fast, this will be at our doorstep in no time.
Yes, I that's a really good point. I would say also one thing that has decreased the political space a little bit is the fact that a lot of the more bullish predictions on how fast everything is going to happen have been a little wrong. Like, I think, was it Dario Amodei that said, like, in 6 months all code will be written by AI, and that was like 6 months ago. You know, I mean, a lot of code isn't written by AI, but like humans still need to be at the end of it. So I feel like wrong predictions actually decrease the political space. But I agree with you that, like, over time, just more of us will get like more of us, the labor market thing will definitely open the political space. Sure.
There's a couple points I want to address. Initially, just relating to something I've been thinking about related to AI is that even though the rate of advancement in the technology is pretty much exponential, it takes a lot longer for, like, society to actually incorporate those technologies and efficiently do so. For what I understand, they've done studies on like 95% of like firms that try to implement AI haven't really seen a profit. But yeah, it doesn't really, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how long it takes, because such a big effect, you know, it's irrelevant if it takes 5 or 10 years, it's still going to change everyone's life. That's with regard to that point. Thinking about what can be a wake-up moment, I think social inequality, which has already been growing, might be even intensified by AI, not only on the unemployment side, in which large parts of the population doesn't have any mean of income, but also I think it will solidify increasingly smaller elite who has controls on this means of production. And the third point, and last, I want to make is one of the scary things about AI is a lot of the social impacts it's going to have. It's actually hard to measure. So something I'm very concerned about is like how it might affect human relationships, and we're already leaning towards more automation and AI companions, and just spending less time around humans probably gonna make that worse. And that's something very hard to like causally draw causal line back to AI. Another issue might be political radicalization, which is already happening through social media. And when you use AI to like fine tune those algorithms, it might even make worse those like content bubbles that already exist. So these are like issues caused by AI, but hard to trace back to AI.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the overall political space, from based on what I'm seeing in like just the general news cycle, what people are talking about on podcasts, like about job losses, how like ChatGPT helped this young man like commit suicide, like just the amount of AI related news is coming up more, and the reaction from the public, from what I'm hearing, it seems kind of like it's kind of a resignation right now. It's like, oh yeah, it's coming, but like as you said, so there's no like real action. There's no like on the street protests like the climate rebellion stuff, or you know something as like Gaza, which is like super different beast completely, but like as fiery as that. However, I would say the stage is being set for like it's like all this kindling is on the ground, and like one thing needs to go over, and then it might spark up something. Like the conditions are being created for an expansion of political space. I'm not sure when. I'm not sure how. I think it has to do with the labor market, but yeah, my feeling is something will happen. So I guess for all those of you working on AI policy, or in school, writing papers, pick a problem and find a solution and propose a solution. And you never know, that solution might be dusted off and be implemented when the shit hits the fan and we need a solution, and that paper actually answers that particular solution. I guess that's the whole point of this discussion. Any other questions, comments, anything? Yes, sir.
So I feel like the core idea behind like the need for AI safety and AI alignment, I think it's just like a bit too abstract for there to ever be like a popular movement like the Gaza protests or like the climate protests to revolve around AI alignment. I also think that it might be a bit too abstract for like even most policymakers to understand. But like as AI has like more impact on the world, especially through like the labor market disruption, and maybe if there's some major AI safety incident, then I think that could get more people to call for regulations against AI.
I think that's a very good distinction, because I feel like well, actually maybe I should have done this, but like the political space is different for AI induced unemployment and labor market transition versus existential risks. I feel like it's much lower, the political space is much lower for X risk among the general population, and much higher for like labor market shortage, because like people can see that in daily life, you know? So yeah, I guess we can break up AI safety into like many different spaces as well. Adrian?
I could see like protests if it's revealed that AI is being used to support deterrence for protests, like in like Portland right now. If that becomes something that's popular, I could see that being pretty inflammatory.
I don't know, have there been have you seen anything like that? I haven't seen any. I mean, there are protests against Palantir. I think, yeah, there have been protests against Palantir pretty regularly, and they definitely use AI to surveil protests, I'm pretty sure. But I haven't seen the mass protests. The only thing I've seen mass protests against use of Palantir and Microsoft stuff in Gaza. That's what I've seen, like AI stuff in Gaza. Anyone else? Sir?
Thanks for the presentation. I think there's also like one thing that ties well with like this aspect is privacy, because I think we're giving away a lot of our information as we're trying and testing out the new systems right now. So there's a lot of content being generated, you know, like images, videos, text, you know, audio as well. So we're not seeing the impact right now, but maybe in the future, we're like, oh no, I didn't make that call to the bank, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. There should be a way to trace back, you know, all that information and see if it's like something that you've actually done, or it was just generated based on your information.
So you think there will be it'll be more public issue of like kind of deep faking your personal information,
Yeah.
where you're like for criminals to like extract money from you or like blackmail you or something.
Yeah, and I think already like on social media, it's hard to distinguish like actual information from, you know, things that are just created by bots or other things out there right now. So we're already seeing that, but I think it's in the future it's going to grow like to an exponential level. So it's going to be hard to distinguish between the two.
Mario.
First, I'm going to do that annoying thing and say I have a comment, which is more. Some people talked about the kind of some sort of organized political activism, sort of like climate change. That there does exist that group. It's called Pause AI, and as far as I can tell, it is growing over time. I do have a question for you, Jason. One of the big differences I noticed between some of these different triggers are how gradual versus sudden they are. And you touched a bit on this, like how 9/11 was like a very sudden thing, whereas climate change is like a super gradual thing. And it seems like some of the effects that we may be worried about with AI fall in the gradual camp, such as like very, very stark inequality or power concentration. Do you know of any like concepts you could direct us towards or like papers that cover like, I don't know, some sort of like threshold theory that will like help us understand like once you get to a certain point regarding the gradual things, it becomes like sufficiently intense or proximal?
That is a good question. I know a quick query to ChatGPT would let me know the answer to that right away. I don't know any like specific thing about threshold, but I would say that on the AI stuff, there is some. We are in a gradual period right now, but I believe that there will be other moments where the perception of the world changing overnight will occur. Especially like there's just so much of it out there, especially with robots being deployed. Like I feel like it's building towards a critical mass, and once the critical mass builds, then it could probably like break. I mean, even if you look at the deployment of ChatGPT, like I think every single programmer knew that was possible, but just the general public did not. And it was like you look at the story of how ChatGPT was deployed in November 2022, like it was one of those things where a lot of things accumulated, and then they were like, okay, we want to come up with this chatbot first to beat everyone else, and then we did it, and then it changed the world, you know, and they were kind of surprised they released their second-rate chatbot, and it ended up everyone was like, whoa, what the hell, you know? So I don't know the answer to your question, but I feel like, yeah, it's both long-term and it's both, it will involve critical events. Yes. Did anyone else? Yes, sir.
I was thinking about protests against for machine rights, like the idea they start recognizing it's a real mind, an entity that should have its rights. That like our idea of what is a living thing or what should have rights, that changed when we thought animals didn't have a consciousness, even though we don't know what that is. Now we agree that animals have rights. The question is, when's that going to happen? Because these AI are beginning to have all the boxes checked for what would be considered an independent thinking mind, which goes to thresholds. I can suggest institutional theory, which is about how sticky change is. It's not easy to change institutions, but once enough things happen to delegitimize the status quo, things can suddenly move fast, like when Enron upended corporate governance and there's this huge change, like a knee-jerk reaction. But I see this happening in two ways. When the public starts seeing, like it becomes very obvious, then it can change very quickly. It's gradual up to that. That helps. Institutional theory was one of my things I had to deal. I know, so it can help. I think there might be other ways of looking at it as well, but that's what I'm familiar with. So do you think that when do you think they're gonna start talking about like the AI rights? Because I'm waiting for that too.
AI rights? I don't really know, but the political space for the AI rights people might open someday. You never know. Yeah, you ever watched the Animatrix, the Second Renaissance? That's a great. No, you never watched that? Oh, that is a great forecast of our situation right now. Anyways, there's a segment about AI rights in there. It's really funny. Actually, not really. Okay, if that's it, then yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming. And Marty, you want to close it out, or should I just do it? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for coming, everybody. You're welcome to stick around for a while longer. And yeah, do we have QR codes? We're gonna throw some QR codes up if you want to keep in touch with us for future events or join us on Slack. But yeah, for now, feel free to just mingle and stick around.